On today's Locked On Giants podcast, what did we learn from the New York Giants spring slate of workouts? That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of our written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And speaking of New York Giants on SI, I'm joined today by one of my writers, who's also, those of you who follow Florida, you'll probably recognize him from Locked On Gators, but he is Brandon Olsen. He was with me all spring long at the Giants OTAs that were open to the media. He was also with me for the 2-day minicamp that just wrapped up today. Brandon, we got a lot to talk about. First, welcome on in.
Yeah, thank you. Excited. Team looks so much better than they've looked in years past. I don't remember the last time I was genuinely excited for this.
Yeah. Joe Schoen has done a really good job with this roster, filling up a lot of spots that were weak, some depth issues that they had. We're going to break all this stuff down. But Brandon, let's start off with the biggest takeaways from the spring. Just what kind of jumped out at you that has you saying, yeah, I think this team's going in the right direction?
The fact that quarterback play looks like serious quarterback play this year. It's just miles ahead of what we've seen. And it's not just from the starters. It's depth as well. It's just way better than we've seen in recent years. And it's just comforting to know that, look, I don't know if Russell Wilson's going to be the Russell Wilson from Seattle or what he's going to be here, but I do know that he's going to be better than we've seen from quarterbacks in recent past, and not just Daniel Jones, but just in any quarterback play we've seen in recent years. I think Russell Wilson's going to be better and a breath of fresh air for Giants fans.
Yeah, especially with his ability to throw the deep ball. We saw a little bit of that in the spring. Finally, you have somebody who can get the ball down the field to some of these speedsters that the Giants have at receiver. And Russell Wilson has also been, they've talked about how good he has been in the locker room, his leadership, his attention to detail, the example he's setting for Jaxson Dart, the rookie. Just everybody you've asked on the Giants has basically spoken highly of Russell Wilson, which is an X factor, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about defensive players who are just like, oh, he's just the guy. He's come in, he's taken over right away. We heard today that Brian Dable was like, look, Russ doesn't want to take a day off. Like, I don't know what he's going to do exactly, but I know he's not going to be resting in these few weeks off before training camp. And so I think that, Russ's leadership is another thing where we just haven't seen, and that's not a knock on anybody. It's just, Russ has the absolute reputation of being just pure football, great leader. And I think that we've been able to see that from what we've been able to see as media.
Right. Now, before we get into this next discussion, let's just put a disclaimer out here. During the spring, there was no contact, no pads, no true pass rush to speak of. But that being said, Brandon, what were your takeaways as far as how different the offense looked?
It looked a lot more deep ball friendly, and that's not just a Russell Wilson thing. That's Jameis Winston. That's more probably, I think part of that comes to just having more confidence in this offensive line. Last year, I think that they did a really good job of just getting offensive linemen that are higher quality. And now in year two, with a lot of those guys returning, you get to see a bit more chemistry. You get the playbook to open up a little bit more. So I think it's really a combination of everything. It's not as simple as just quarterback play. It's that the offense looks more explosive. Like Russell Wilson even said after Tuesday's practice, he said, our identity, we're going to be explosive. And that's something that we're looking to do. And so I think that you could see that. You mentioned having all the speedsters. Jalen Hyatt hasn't been able to be the Jalen Hyatt that went off for 4 touchdowns against Alabama. He hasn't been able to do those things. And I do think that now with just the quarterback play throughout, you might actually see some of that.
Yeah, and we also saw a few more wrinkles in there with the different formations, and not just lineup stuff, but different formations, different things that we haven't seen necessarily in the past. Didn't see a whole lot in terms of the running game. I know a lot of people are interested in that. We'll see more of that once the pads go on next month. The Giants opening training camp, by the way, July 22nd. First practice will be July 23rd. That was just announced by the league. But Brandon, let's talk about the different units now. Let's start up front with the offensive line. The offensive line right now projects to return the same five starters that they started last season with. How does that make you feel?
Uh, Pretty good, honestly. I think that continuity on the offensive line is a huge part of the game. I've always had that thought since, I mean, when the Giants were winning Super Bowls, it was oftentimes, not that they have the best offensive linemen, but that they have just a great unit that knows how to play together. And I think that having year two with this offensive line is huge. I think that depth wise, they've gotten better and just players getting more comfortable. And I think that's an important part that not enough people talk about with the offensive line is that a lot of it comes down to chemistry. And we heard a lot of that from Andrew Thomas last year, where he kept saying, part of the reason that the offensive line struggled is because I'm playing next to different people every week. We've got different injuries going on. And so it's just tough to go out there and be able to play at a high level consistently with all the moving parts. But hopefully if these guys can stay healthy, and injuries are going to happen. It's football. But even then, now the depth should be more comfortable playing with the starters at this point. We saw a lot of James Hudson at left tackle during the spring. And so if for some reason he needs to play during the game, that'll be something that they've been comfortable with and they've been able to work on throughout the offseason.
One of the stories with the offensive line, obviously, is Evan Neal and how his conversion to guard is coming along. Now, again, we won't necessarily be able to tell until the pads go on, but based on the fundamentals, we did see some of the drills. We talked to Carmen Brasillo when he spoke to the media on Tuesday. What are your thoughts on how that process is going, and what do you think Evan Neal needs to show in order to maybe have a chance of cracking the starting lineup at guard?
I think that one of the things he just needs to show is just that he's capable of handling, Jermaine Illuminor talked about it a lot on Wednesday after minicamp wrapped up. He was one of the players at media availability, and Evan Neal was a big talking point during that availability. And Jermaine Illuminor just said, look, it's not easy to do. It's really hard to go from right tackle to left tackle for him last year. And it's even harder to go from tackle to guard because things happen quicker when you're there at guard. He was talking how tackle play is, can you be patient and wait for the edge to make a move and then you react to that? But in guard, it's just, Dexter Lawrence, just they snap the ball and you've got Dexter Lawrence in your face in a millisecond. And that's not easy. That's not fun, but it's just about buying in, which he did mention. Evan Neal has really been bought into the process. I played a little bit of guard at Alabama. And so hopefully that'll help him translate over. But it's not easy. I do think that we've seen offensive linemen that are that size move into guard with a bit of success. Mekhi Becton last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, where it used to feel like the tackle to guard conversation was just built around, are you too small to play tackle at a high level? And now it's not about just size. It's about your skill set. And if Evan Neal can make that translation and make that transition, then he should be able to at least compete for that opportunity.
Right. And Carmen Brasillo was talking about it in response to a question I put to him yesterday. I said, has he been flip-flopping between left and the right side? He says, yeah, he's been working a little bit on the right side, but he mentioned the left guard spot, which is the position Evan Neal played in college. A big concern, though, with Evan Neal and making this conversion is he's pretty tall for a guard. So pad level is something that they're going to definitely have to keep an eye on, I would think.
Absolutely. They're going to have to keep an eye on that because that's been the reason why people think, okay, if you're too small to play tackle, you play guard because you can keep your pad level lower and you're going to be hanging and banging more down low. But it's come to a point where we think that Evan Neal can operate with power there. A lot of it's just his footwork and being placed there because pad level is going to be a pain, but that's going to be something that he's always going to have to deal with. Just being that tall. And we've seen, defensive linemen coming into the league lately where it's like, yeah, they're 6'1" playing on the interior. And that's really low. You're not going to get lower than that. If you're 6'7", 6'8", And you're just going to have to be able to be nimble enough and powerful enough to operate it. It's not easy. We've seen guard become not a premium position, but more valued in recent years. The Panthers invested tons of money there in free agency a couple of seasons ago because teams have started to invest more on interior pass rushing. And so that's been a big part of it, where being able to actually get into your set and hold your own is a challenge. Evan Neal is always going to have the pad level challenge, but if you can win in the other areas, you can kind of negate that disadvantage that you just naturally have from being tall.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the guy can run block. We have seen him do it at a high enough level. The pass block is going to be the key, getting his pass sets, and his angles and his feet, properly set. That's probably my biggest concern with him, is that he didn't have the feet necessarily to play tackle. Is he going to have the feet inside to play guard? Or, and I asked Priscilla about that. He mentioned there's a little bit of a difference, but they're going to keep working at it to get him up to speed. And again, we won't really know where he stands on that until they get the pads on. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk some more about our takeaways, starting with the wide receivers, where suddenly that's a very competitive group. So don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back. Hey, Giant fans, ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, your investments, and spending all in one place. So just stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Since I've started using Monarch Money, I have a better handle on where my earnings go, and I have been better able to budget my monthly spending. So go on and take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. You got Patricia Traina, myself, your host, and I'm with Brandon Olsen, who is with Locked On Gators, but he was with me all spring long at the New York Giants OTAs and, of course, the minicamp that just concluded on Wednesday. So he had a bunch of notes. I have a bunch of notes, and we're very excited by what we saw. But Brandon, let's talk about the wide receivers, because, every year the Giants bring in a ton of receivers. They just kind of need, I think, like a dozen or so in order to fill out first team, second team, third team. But this group in particular, and tell me if you disagree, looks a little bit more competitive than I can recall it looking in the last several years.
Yeah, there's probably, look, we watched all spring without Malik Neighbors available. But you just look, and toward the end, Jalen Hyatt, of course, he looked like he was walking fine on Wednesday's minicamp. So hopefully nothing big there, but just the depth in this receiver room right now is just insane, because they're going to have to make some tough decisions about who to keep from the undrafted free agent pool, who to keep from just on the backside that could play special teams and contribute in multiple ways. Montrell Washington is someone that I've been a fan of since the Samford days, but is there a spot? You're a great special teamer, but Amir Smith-Marset has that, and they're going to be battling for those opportunities. It's just going to be a lot of young talent competing for who's going to be a bottom of the roster guy, who's going to be a practice squad player. But they absolutely nailed the undrafted free agent signings. I think just about all of them have had plays where we've looked at them and we've been like, all right, well, they're going to be pushing here. And that's just, they just absolutely nailed the undrafted free agent signings with receivers.
Yeah, and a couple guys who really stood out. We saw Bo Collins after Jalen Hyatt, had his injury go on Tuesday. Dalen Cambry looked good. There's going to be some interesting competition there. And as you said, for special teams, so guys like maybe Bryce Ford Wheaton might have to work a little harder to defend his roster spot. And then, the other thing they've kind of done with this receiver group is they've gone taller. They have a lot more guys who are like 6'1", 6'2", and higher, or taller, I should say, which I thought was an interesting little shift in their philosophy, if you will.
Yeah, I think part of that comes from having a guy like Russell Wilson, where he's going to be looking to, he throws those. I mean, he's had the beautiful deep ball, like the best deep ball in football for years. That's just always been his calling card of just the way that he lofts it over the defense. I think having those taller DB or having those taller receivers to go up against DBs can be a big advantage. And I think that was part of it. Lil Jordan Humphrey has been with the team this spring. Daquan Felton's a big undrafted free agent. Bo Collins has good size. Juice Wells, not as tall, but he's still someone that goes up and gets in, competes downfield for the ball. So other than bringing in Zach Pascal is another veteran free agent that they brought in there. They brought in guys that can go win the deep ball. And when you have that height, you have a natural advantage over DBs, where we're seeing corners that are 5'11", 6 feet playing outside consistently. And while it's great that you can do that, you've got to go up against a 6'4" receiver, and you're at a disadvantage immediately there. On top of all the other disadvantages of playing DB in today's football, now you have Russell Wilson throwing the deep ball to some of these big receivers, and it's really not easy to contest that.
Right. Now, before we get off the offense, we got to talk a little bit about Jaxson Dart, who was one of the main storylines this entire spring. Brian Dable talking about how Jaxson Dart has made progress. Nobody's appointing him, the next Patrick Mahomes just yet. Still got a ways to go. We saw some times when maybe he was holding the ball a little too long or rushing a throw or not putting the ball where it should be. But overall, Brandon, what were your takeaways with what you saw from Jaxson Dart?
That he was fairly inconsistent, but that's kind of what I was expecting from him. He even said on Wednesday, he's like, I'm an aggressive quarterback, and that's not changing. Brian Dable mentioned that he loves the aggressiveness of Jaxson Dart because he's got that big arm where he can make the throws. And we've talked about, sometimes he'll make a throw where he's running backwards and to his left, and it'll be wobbly or it'll be just a bad ball in general. But he has that arm arrogance where he feels like he can make any throw, and that's going to get you in trouble. But you're also going to make some wow throws, and it's going to be really impressive. And so I think with Dart, a lot of it just comes down to getting comfortable and learning the offense because, and Brian Dable has mentioned this a trillion times this spring, they kind of threw everything at him, and they just said, hey, we'll see what sticks, but for now, we're just going to throw everything at you. And so it's a lot happening mentally. So it's hard for me to fault a young quarterback for those mental errors right now in his first spring after getting drafted, but the physical there is it's really impressive. And we expected it to be really impressive, but it's really impressive to see in person, the way the ball just flies out of his hands. So I think that it's kind of what I expected. It's messy at times, but he's also just got the potential to be great. And when you watch that, it's tough to not kind of fall in love with that just physical ability that he has.
Right. And of course, he's going to have to get used to the speed of the game, which they really can't simulate in practice. The pass rush, you really can't simulate that either because the quarterback knows he can't be touched, he can't be hit. So, you can see a defender come flying by you, but you think, oh, okay, I got maybe a split second more to make the throw. So these are all things. And I believe Jaxson Dart is going to get a healthy dose of preseason snaps. They know what they got in Russell Wilson, although I would suspect he's going to get some snaps. If for no other reason, they want to make sure they come out of the gate quickly as opposed to the last couple of years. They know what they've got in Jameis Winston. They kind of know what they've got with Tommy DeVito. Why not just give the kid as much work as you possibly can to see what he can do? Let him get acclimated to the speed of the game and also the pass rush and just, the different things that go on that cause a quarterback to have to go off script here and there.
Yeah, and it was talked about on Wednesday after practice where Jaxson Dart's kind of still getting used to the athleticism upgrade. And as an SEC guy, we could always talk about how the SEC is the best in college football and it's all full of NFL players, but it's not all NFL players. There are guys there that aren't going to be in the NFL. There are guys there that are going to be bottom feeders at the NFL level. And so while you're used to playing the best talent in college football, it's different from going up and playing against NFL players. And so Jaxson Dart's still also getting accustomed to, I can make this throw in the NFL. I can't make this throw in the NFL. And that's why I'm fine with throw as many interceptions as you're going to throw in practice, as long as they're justified. And it seems like Jaxson Dart's still trying to figure out, I can't make this tight window throw right now, or I can't make this kind of throw in the NFL because these guys are just a different breed of athletes I mean, you look at a roster in person, and they're just insane looking athletes at all times at every position. Even when guys, you're like, oh yeah, he looks smaller than the rest, he's still ginormous compared to every other average human. So it's an adjustment period for Jaxson Dart right now, but I think he's getting there. I think he's trying to figure out what he can and can't do, and yeah, get him as many reps as you can in live game situations where they're not blowing the whistle dead because someone got into the backfield even if they didn't touch you. And so I think that it's just going to be a long process, but I think so far he's kind of doing what we expected him to do, and that's better than underperforming in my opinion. So I'm fine with anything we've seen from Dart.
Absolutely. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk defense. And boy, has the defense looked pretty good in what we have seen. So don't go anywhere, Giant fans. We'll be right back. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, joined by Brandon Olsen of New York Giants on SI. He was with me all spring long as we watched the OTAs. We watched the mandatory minicamp, the rookie minicamp back in May. And, of course, you can also find Brandon on Locked On Gators. So he knows college football pretty well, especially the SEC. And, Brandon, let's talk now about the Giants' defense, because I got to tell you, I am so stoked for what we saw. I mean, you know, we talk about the pass rush with Abdul Carter having been added. And even though it's not a true pass rush and that the offensive line can't block these guys, what stood out to me, and you tell me if you agree or not, was just how quick these guys, Carter and Thibodeau and Burns, it was almost like as soon as the ball was snapped, boom, they were into the backfield causing disruption. Did you see the same thing?
Yeah, they've just got explosive athletes right now, especially on the edge, where I don't know how opposing offenses are going to deal with it. But Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, they all just, the second the ball is snapped, they fly, they just explode. It's insane to watch how quick of a first step they have. And teams have started to kind of, you know, offenses, they try to get the ball out quickly, whether it's deep or short, they're trying to get rid of the ball quickly. And it seems like the Giants right now have the guys to say, hey, you got to get it out even quicker than usual because we're going to be back there flying. We're ferocious. I mean, we've seen in person and we've seen the clips of Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, all on the field at the same time. And I don't even know what the plan is there if you're an offense. I have no clue what your plan is if you're an offense. You're just like, yeah, that's in front of us. Figure it out. And sometimes even another defensive lineman sometimes out there with them. So it's just going to be tough if you're an opposing offense to try to stop this pass rush, which should live up to the hype that we've all been, us included, that we've all been building for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Charlie Bolin, the outside linebackers coach, he was part of a group of assistant coaches and defensive assistant coaches spoke to the media on Wednesday. Bolin was talking about how for the time being, the plan is to kind of rotate those guys, Carter, Thibodeau, Burns, which is kind of something that I said a while ago. Initially, that's what they're going to do. They're going to kind of take some snaps away from Thibodeau and Burns, keep them fresh. But ultimately, we're going to see packages with all three of them on the field. Brandon, we saw Carter line up a little bit at inside linebacker. I think there were a couple plays we saw him line up on the line. I mean, based on what you saw, I mean, what do you envision for him besides being an outside edge rusher?
I envision them just weaponizing him. That's the best way to describe it. Just weaponize him, put him on the field, and just make people earn every yard, every down. And I can see them. I hate doing this because it's a Cowboys player, but I could see them using Abdul Carter similar to how Micah Parsons was used early in his career, where he's lining up everywhere, he's doing everything. We've seen Shane Bowen use edge rushers off ball before. That's not new. He did it with Harold Landry and the Tennessee Titans. He would have him line up off ball, had him line up at slot corner a few times if a tight end's out there. So just finding ways to put him on the field, making sure that it's not predictable of what he's doing. There's going to be times where he's lined up as an edge rusher and he's dropping the coverage. There's going to be times where he's lined up off ball and he's pass rushing. So it's just about using him in a variety of ways. And he's a very unique defensive player that can actually get away with doing all of these things where not everybody can do it. You're not going to see some edge rushers playing middle linebacker and dropping into coverage out of there. It's often guys where, hey, if you're playing off-ball linebacker, we're blitzing from that spot. You're just a blitzer. But Abdul Carter, we've seen him operate in coverage there. We've seen him work there, and having that genuine experience off-ball is going to be huge for just opening up the way that they can harass quarterbacks in this season.
And don't forget, you and I were talking about this yesterday about how that you can maybe use him as a spy.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, you got Jaden Daniels in your division. You got Jalen Hurts in your division. You got Dak. Like, you've got guys where you're going to have to defend, and they're very athletic quarterbacks. I mean, we're watching another renaissance a bit of more mobile quarterbacks coming in, but not just, oh yeah, he can run pretty fast. Quarterbacks that are running, 4.4, 4.5, and they're just outrunning defenders. And so having Abdul Carter out there could help really kind of stymie some of those offenses, like the Commanders specifically, where Jaden Daniels can outrun a lot of DBs. Now you've got someone with the athleticism to at least slow him down a bit.
Brandon, when you look at this defense, and again, they put a lot of love towards the defense, a lot of personnel, but do you feel that Shane Bowen maybe has more of what he needs to run the system that he wants to run as opposed to last year?
Absolutely. I think versatility is a big part of what he wants to do defensively. And I think that they've done a fantastic job of just adding versatile players throughout. I mean, the secondary, Paulson Adebo can play any type of coverage that you're going to ask him to. Javon Holland can play any type of coverage that you're going to ask him to, can line up anywhere. Tyler Nubin, Dane Belton, like the safety room with just those top three can line up anywhere, basically do anything that you're going to ask them to do. And just, they give you the ability to cover without sacrificing run cover or run defense. And so I think that now with just the level of versatile players that they've got, they can do anything that they want. I think Shane Bowen can really open up the playbook, especially in year two, now that guys are more comfortable with the defense.
All right, Brandon, from a bigger picture perspective, there were several guys that did not work a whole lot, if at any, this spring. Anybody in particular have you concerned that, the fact that they didn't work as much as maybe you would have liked to have seen them work?
I would have really liked to see Darius Alexander work more. I mean, Cam Scatterbo, as a running back, a lot of it is, where you're supposed to go generally, and then you have to read, react, and make a play there. Bobby Okereke, like I'm not going to worry about Bobby. That's just not a guy that I'm going to be concerned with. But we didn't see Darius Alexander at all. And as much as I liked him as a prospect, he's still raw. He still needs work and development. And so to not have that, even though I understand defensive line reps aren't really full reps in the spring, it's still important where basically all day on Wednesday in the minicamp, defensive line guys were working on hand technique and hand usage. And you're missing those reps where, while it's not full speed here, you can kind of start slow and then pick up speed as you go on. And that just gets you ahead, where now he's going to be kind of behind the curve there compared to some other guys on the line.
What do you think, based on what we saw? And again, the disclaimer is no pads, no contact. But that being said, what do you think is the strength of this team, and what area of this team has you most concerned?
I think the strength of the offense will be, like Russell Wilson said, explosiveness. I think they've got great talent for that, the receivers and running backs. I think defensively, the strength is going to be versatility, just being able to adapt to anything. And I think for me, one of the concerns is just there's some spots where depth is still going to concern me until I see that it shouldn't be a concern. Offensive line, you're still maybe an injury away from things getting really bad there. Where I like the upgrades that they've made, but liking the upgrades in early mid-June is different from liking the upgrades in September, October, November. So I think for me, it's just depth at some spots. Inside linebacker, I'm projecting to be better, but will they be? We'll see when they actually get going full speed. So I think for me, it's just there's some spots at depth. I think that it's a significantly better roster than it was last year, but there's just some questions that just need to be answered at this point.
Yeah, and I'll throw in safety as another position where I'm a little concerned about the depth there. They've got some guys that I think can step up, but I know Anthony Johnson was dealing with, I believe, a shoulder issue. Just the depth there is a little thin for my taste, but there's plenty of more. They've got several weeks before training camp starts. They can always add guys, I suppose, and then of course we'll see who's ready to start, who's ready to play, I should say, or practice come July 22nd when they report to camp. So that being said, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Now, make sure you keep it here. I've got one more show for you. I'm going to focus specifically on training camp battles, pending training camp battles. So that's coming up on tomorrow's show. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget, check out Locked On NFL with Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino. They will get you everything you need to know about NFL training camps that are coming up across the league. They'll make you the best informed football fans. You can find that wherever you find your Locked On podcasts. For Brandon Olsen, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, we'll see you tomorrow.